Okay, so after the completion of the miter saw station and the radial arm saw station in the cabinets, it was kind of time to move on to some type of a fence assembly and a stop block. So one of the things I've never liked about a lot of the stop blocks I see on miter stations is that the tape measure usually faces directly forward out of the actual fence, or it faces directly straight up in the air. So what I wanted to do is to come up with something where the actual tape measure looked directly at me. So I'm about 6'1", and thought if I could get a 45-degree angle on something, that it would be easier for me to look down on top of the tape. So it actually kind of worked out by playing with this wood and making this big blob of a stop block, because I found out that one of the local home centers had 5/4 poplar, and that 5/4 thickness was super important. It came into play big time because I needed to put two tape measures side by side on the middle section fence, which I'm showing right here between the two saws. So I'm kind of getting out of order here. That's actually the unstained finished fence, and it's just to get an idea about what this thing looked at before assembly. The one on the left-hand side of the radial arm saw and the right-hand side of the radial arm saw were adjustable. Those T-tracks were plowed into the actual bench top because that radial arm saw, it actually has an adjustable fence. So theoretically, you can take parts of the fence apart, and the stop block assembly all loosens up, and you can slide back that fence on the radial arm saw, I think about 2.5 inches, something like that. I don't know if I'm ever going to do that, but just in case, I just wanted to make sure that I had the ability to do it. So basically, it was just a couple of dado grooves, put in T-tracks again, and then run those bolts all the way through to the top edge of the actual fence assembly. I didn't have bolts that were anywhere near long enough to get through there. I'll show those later. I basically just welded them onto some 5/16 all thread, and that allowed them to stick through those support blocks, through the plywood on the stop, and put the actual T-nuts on the top edge instead of having to take that apart if it wanted to get shifted. So that worked out actually very, very, very well. But it did give the availability to move this thing around a little bit. And then for assembly, basically the way this starts, I cut the top edge of the 5/4 poplar, 45-degree angle. Then first cut was running it through the routing table, putting a rabbet on the bottom of it. I was really concerned about this wood bowing, and in fact it did. It started to bow before I ever got it put together. So the rabbet on the bottom was just to accept a piece of plywood, which of course is very stable. And so after running it through the router table, then the next step of this was to go ahead and lay it down on its back, pull a cable router through, kind of dado in the front edge of it. That's obviously for the T-track. And the T-track is to hold a T-nut, and of course the stop nut to hold the actual stop block in place. So far so good, no problems yet. Everything was kind of humming along. And of course I had to do that to all three pieces. I've got three different fence assemblies, one on the left side of the Godzilla chop saw, one in the middle that's adjustable, one on the right side of the radial arm saw that is also adjustable. So that's so far working out good. This poplar is green, looks green, so it's going to look different here in a minute after I get it stained, but right now I'm just in assembly. And this is where I started noticing some issues. I really went out of my way to glue up blocks and to glue in that rabbet on that piece of wood that's attached to the rabbet on the bottom. That board was starting to banana. So with a ton of clamps and some glue, and of course plywood's a great brace product because it's so stable. So all this stuff's being glued up, and once it's done, you can kind of see that very top edge up there. It's still starting to bow to the right, and Candidly, the rabbet that was cut in down at the bottom is working great. Once that plywood's in place, glue's dry, clamps are off, it held the bottom assembly perfectly flat. But the top's still a problem. And I was going to use just a little piece of 1/4-inch plywood up there, just a little bit of a design change, no big deal. I had to switch that around, go to a piece of 3/4-inch, 4-inch wide stock, and I actually had to pull that with a clamp just a little tiny bit on the far end of that. And this is the long section, the 8-footer. This is the short section that we just saw a couple of minutes ago that's between the actual chop saw and the radial arm saw, and those are the T-bolts. I could have put them on the inside, but every time you wanted to move the fence around, if you wanted to, you'd have to take the top off. So I just went to the effort to go ahead and take the 2.5-inch T-bolts, drill a hole through those 4x4 plywood blocks, and then I just welded an extension on the ends of them. That's just a piece of 5/16 all thread. The weld itself obviously is going to be hidden on the inside of the box. I didn't really care about that, but it's a little extra step right now, but it definitely made it a ton easier just to go ahead and have the bolt sticking through the top. And so if that fence needs to move, then the only thing you have to do is just loosen up the bolts. So we've gotten that done. Now it's kind of on to working on this actual stop block. First step, of course, is to plow out some kind of a dado, and it really isn't that big a deal, even though it's a very small piece of wood. I basically just used my lamb router. I had a couple of blocks set up. I only had a 1/4-inch wide bit. It wasn't a big deal. Just put a spacer in there and run 2 passes. And that plows out the little area for a spline, really, that will intersect the middle of the T-track. And then, of course, the next step of this was to take a look at how the actual block itself was going to be assembled. Basically, since I 45'd the top of that 5/4 poplar, those are two 22.5-degree cuts, which allow that top edge to kind of hang over the 45-degree angle. And of course, on the back side of this, the actual pointer assembly, which is just a piece of bar stock aluminum, is going to set. So the way to make that happen is to go ahead and do your 22.5s. I was a little concerned about this thing breaking, if I hit it, bumped it with a piece of wood or whatever. So I did mark it, put just a little kind of a stop block assembly up on top of the bench, and then set all these in there. I had 3 of them to do, so I put them in there. I had to kind of do a little math to figure out the right angle for the biscuit joiner, the plate joiner. So I went ahead and cut 1 single biscuit in each piece, glued them together, and those are nice and secure. They'll never come apart again. So that worked out pretty good as well. And then, of course, to get a stop assembly, I ended up using an elevator bolt on the inside of this that basically the stock sets against on the actual fence assembly. These elevator bolts, I don't know what they do for elevators. And I'll put a link in the description. You can't even read that little bag, but I bought these things off Amazon. They're 1/4 20 thread, which is just standard 1/4-inch thread. And all you do is you take an insert, and you can get those at any hardware store, and drill a hole in the side of your stop block, and then pound that insert in there. There's not really any stress on it, so it's not going to go anywhere. And it just has to be offset. I offset mine to the left or away from the fence about 1/16 of an inch. And the reason for that is that the head of that elevator bolt is exactly 3/4 of an inch. So I just got clearance from the fence and clearance from the bottom, so when it runs back and forth, it's not going to hit the fence. I would also advise you, too, to make darn sure that you put some blue Loctite on that stud when you insert that. And the reason for that is when you fine tune this, you don't want that thing to move around. So I put a lock nut and a nut on there before I actually inserted the elevator bolts. So if you do that, then it's not going to move around when you're trying to tune it a little bit. And that's just the actual piece of aluminum that I put on the backside for the pointer. And that worked out pretty good. Last thing that happened for me is this was the hardest part of this whole thing. If you want to you want to know the truth. I was bound and determined to try to do a clear acetate, or actually Lexan pointer, and it's just piece of plastic. That's all it is. I was trying to scribe a line through it and then find some liquid that I could put in that scribe line to have a really clear indicator, kind of like you see on your table saw that floats over the top of your fence assembly. And geez Louise, I cut up a 12-inch by 12-inch piece of Lexan, and I don't know. I tried this 15 times, something like that. And I finally got one of them to look great by using a pen and putting a mark in there. And the pen I finally used was just a fine tip black ink pen. And that worked out great. And I thought, okay, I figured out how to do this, even though I've gone through a whole sheet of Lexan. With one of these, at least I could put it on the supplemental fence that's coming up in a minute. And then this happened. Ah! The best one I did. Sprayed it with lacquer and it ate into the finish of the acetate, ruining it. The best one. Ugh. All right, so let's just do a quick wrap up on how this whole thing worked out with this fence and stop block system. So there's Godzilla, this big old Bosch 12-inch saw. On the right side of the saw, which would be my left, starts the main fence. This one's permanently attached, and of course it's got a stop block. This is a stop block with the elevator bolt at the bottom. I apologize for the shaky camera, but I'm not on a gimbal yet. So we've got a aluminum pointer on this one into the dado that was cut in with the T-track installed. The thing I like about this, I think the best, again, is this tape. And I'm about 6'1", and it's kind of hard to tell by the video, but it's pointing directly up into my eyes. So it's super, super simple just to run this down, stop the pointer on a cut, whatever it happens to be, and lock it down. I will say one thing about these elevator bolts. These little darn things are great to use for a stop. You can see how flat that is. The only problem is this little adjustment on the back of the actual elevator bolt is 7 millimeter. So I was in a hurry. So I ran over to the steel shop in the other building and just cut this out of a piece of steel so I would have a way to hang on to this to make the micro adjustments. So I guess if you're going to do this, it's probably a good idea to either get a set of ignition wrenches or something that are metric, because none of the wrench sets that I have an open-ended 7 millimeter wrench. It just doesn't happen. So anyway, then we go to the saw itself. I like this saw. I'm not doing a product review on this. It is a big saw, and things like this handle, this safety switch, are things you need to get used to. My hand is big. I've got a big hand, and I can barely span this handle and get this safety engaged on the bottom to start the saw. So there's some stuff like that that is, I don't know, I don't really love it, but as far as the saw capacity, it's great. Out of the box, all the settings are dead on, and it will cut through a lot of timber, really will. Then we go to the fence that's in the middle. This fence sets between the radial arm saw, of course, and our big chop saw. This fence has got adjustability. See the little T-bolt, little handle things on top. This will loosen. In the back side of it, there is you can kind of see it through all the junk down there. There is another T-track on two sides that this hooks to, so this can get pushed back in case I want to move this fence around with this radial arm saw. I doubt that's ever going to happen. I really don't think it will, but just in case. Then of course, the stop block here in the middle has 2 pointers and 2 tapes. And again, this 45 angle on the actual fence itself had to be wide enough to accommodate 2 half-inch pieces of that stick-on tape. So that worked out great. It just kind of barely makes it, and it is, again, super easy to see with pointers and stops on either side of that stop block. And I didn't really film this. I didn't think it was necessary, but this is for short stock. This basically will slide over, and this tape is pointing straight up, which again I don't really like, but it's so far forward, it's easy to look down on top of it. That is the clear Lexan piece of plastic that I was trying to figure out a way to make that little line. And you can't see that. I actually like that, so you can see on both sides of the pointer. So that worked out pretty good. And this is just dadoed in, of course, with a piece of T-track on the top of the bench. The tape itself has another very shallow dado, half-inch dado, and there's about a 1/16 of an inch between the top of that tape and the actual top itself, so it doesn't get worn off. So then, of course, we've got the radial arm saw. Again, this is just because I like radial arm saws. I could get along just fine without it in this cut station, but it's kind of nice to have two saws that you can operate at the same time. On this side, there's another fence assembly. It's exactly like the one in the middle. You'll see the little T-knob things on top. This fence can get pushed back as well. And again, just follow the same protocol. This is a 45-degree cut on the top of this 5/4 poplar, and that sets the tape kind of looking directly at me. So I really like that. And then again, same story. We've got a stop block down here. Same thing, elevator bolt. This one's got, of course, the aluminum pointer on it. And same exact situation with a short stock stop block. I guess that's what you call this. So these things are great. They just slide over and are indexed so that we can cut down to, well, ½ inch if you want, or less. And they go up on both sides to around, this one's about 18 inches. The one on the left, I think, is 18 or 19 inches. So far I've used this a little bit to start working on face frames for the rest of the cabinet build. And I got to tell you, I love this. Once these things are dialed in, it really is a little surprising. I kind of felt that, well, will they stay accurate? Will they be accurate? And so far I'm within under a 1/16 of an inch after moving them around. So that accuracy is plenty good enough for me. That's really what you get with a tape measure and a pencil lead. So I'm all good with that. So anyway, that's it. The next thing that's going to come up is the drawer assembly. I don't think I'm going to shoot any video on a drawer assembly. There's 10,000 videos that are out there right now on drawers. But I am going to definitely shoot something on drawer facings and door fronts. I think I found a way to save a whole bunch of time making these things. And really, I started counting drawers and thinking, geez, Louie, I've got, I think, about 20 or 22 drawer facings and door facings here. And in order to do that and ever get this done, I've got to find a better way, a faster way to make these things. And I think I've done that. So that'll be the next one out. I hope you subscribe. If you don't subscribe, it makes it really tough to make these videos. So hopefully you'll do that and come back, and we'll have something else for you. I've got a bunch of ideas I'd like to film. So thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you later on. Coming to you from P5 Maker's Place. Down to the radio saw. I'm just getting a couple plain cords. Just a little bit of space between the